The year was 1946, February. The war was over, but in the shadowy corners of New York City, a new kind of battle was about to begin. It wasn't fought with tanks or rifles, no. This war was fought with whispers, with stares, with a single photograph placed on a polished table. This is the story of the night the most powerful gangster in America met his match. And it wasn't in some dark alley. It was in the glittering VIP room of Manhattan's most exclusive club. World War II had ended just months before. The streets were alive with celebration, with hope, with the breath of a nation finally at peace. But in the smoke-filled back rooms, where power was the only currency that mattered, a storm was gathering. Its name was Charles "Lucky" Luciano, the architect of the modern American Mafia, the man who forged the 5 families into a single, terrifying corporation of crime. And he had a problem, a very big problem. You see, Luciano had just been released from Dannemora prison. He'd cut a deal with the government, use his control of the Italian docks to help the war effort, and his sentence would be commuted. He delivered, but there was a cruel twist, a price: deportation. In less than 3 weeks, the United States government was going to put Lucky Luciano on a ship and send him back to Italy, for good, permanently. A man like Luciano, a kingpin, does not simply abandon his kingdom. He had to secure it, lock it down, make sure his empire would thrive in his absence. The 5 families were in order. His trusted lieutenant, Frank Costello, was running the Luciano family. The fearsome Anastasia controlled the docks. The brilliant Meyer Lansky handled the finances. Everything was set. Everything, except for one stubborn, glaring exception: Harlem. More specifically, Harlem's numbers racket, the illegal lottery that was a lifeline for the community and a river of cash for the man who controlled it. Millions of dollars every single week, a fortune just sitting there, ripe for the taking. The Italians had craved it for years. They'd tried before. Oh, they'd tried. Back in 1935, the vicious Dutch Schultz muscled his way in. But Schultz made a fatal, arrogant mistake. He underestimated a quiet, sharp-dressed, fiercely intelligent enforcer named Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Schultz ended up dead in a New Jersey tavern, shot to pieces by rival gunmen. His foray into Harlem died with him. Now, 11 years later, Luciano wanted what Schultz could not take. But Luciano was no Dutch Schultz. He was a strategist, a diplomat of the underworld. He knew you couldn't just roll into Harlem with guns blazing. That was the brute's way, and it always ended in blood and chaos and ruin. No, you had to talk first. You had to show respect. You had to make an offer that couldn't be refused. So Luciano sent a message, a simple, powerful request to Bumpy Johnson. Let's meet. Bumpy didn't respond. Not for a day, not for 3 days. A full week passed in silence. And that silence, that deliberate, deafening silence, told Luciano everything he needed to know. This man was not afraid. This was not going to be easy. The stage was set at the Stork Club on East 53rd Street, the most exclusive nightclub in all of Manhattan, a place where Frank Sinatra crooned, where J. Edgar Hoover sipped his whiskey, where the elite of society pretended not to see the gangsters in their midst. On the night of February 18, 1946, Lucky Luciano reserved the entire VIP room. He arrived with an army, 6 men. Frank Costello, his acting boss, calm and calculating. Anastasia, the Lord High Executioner, his hands forever itching for violence. Meyer Lansky, the tiny, brilliant accountant who could launder money through a keyhole. And 3 stone-faced bodyguards, men who had ended more lives than they could possibly remember. They settled in, a council of power, waiting for a petitioner. Bumpy Johnson walked in alone. Just alone. He was 40 years old, dressed in a tailored navy blue 3-piece suit, crisp white shirt,
No tie, he never wore ties. A gold watch chain glinted from his vest pocket. His hair was perfect, his shoes shone like dark mirrors, and in his right hand he carried a simple leather briefcase. The bodyguards tensed. Their hands twitched toward their jackets, toward the hard steel beneath. But Luciano, he just raised a single finger, a silent command. Let him through. Bumpy moved past them as if they were furniture. His footsteps echoed, sharp and clear on the marble floor. He didn't look at Costello. He didn't glance at Anastasia. He walked straight to the head of the table, the seat reserved for the host, for the boss, for lucky Luciano himself, and he sat down. He placed his briefcase carefully on the polished wood. Then, slowly, deliberately, he took out a cigar. He lit it. The match flared. The smoke curled into the tense, silent air. Nobody moved. Frank Costello's jaw tightened into a hard line. Albert Anastasia's hand drifted slowly, ominously toward his waistband. Meyer Lansky just watched, his eyes like chips of ice behind his glasses. But lucky Luciano, he smiled, a thin, knowing smile, because he recognized the move. This wasn't mere disrespect. This was a declaration, a test. Bumpy Johnson was establishing the terms of this conversation before a single word had been spoken. He was saying, I am not a subordinate, I am not a supplicant, I am an equal sitting at this table. Luciano, the master negotiator, respected that. He took the seat directly across from Bumpy.
Mr. Johnson, Luciano began, his voice a low, calm rumble. The voice of a man who had bargained with presidents and butcher rivals. Thank you for coming. Bumpy took a long, slow drag from his cigar. He let the smoke linger, then blew it toward the ceiling in a perfect ring. His eyes never left Luciano's. Mr. Luciano, he said, his voice deep, steady. You wanted to talk, so talk. Luciano folded his hands on the table, a picture of reason. I'm leaving the country in 3 weeks. The feds are shipping me back to Italy. But before I go, I need to make sure New York stays in order. No wars, no chaos, just business. He paused, letting the weight of his impending exile hang in the air. Bumpy just nodded, said nothing. Harlem, Luciano continued, leaning forward just an inch, is the last piece of the puzzle. The numbers racket is making millions. My people, they want in. But I know you've been running things up there since Schultz died. You have the trust of the community. You have the infrastructure. You have the police on your payroll. Another pause, heavier this time. Luciano's gaze was unwavering. I'm not here to take what's yours, Bumpy. I'm here to offer you a partnership. You keep running Harlem. We provide protection, investment capital, connections to judges, to politicians you can't reach. In return, we take 40% of the profits. You stay independent, but under our umbrella, under our protection. Silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Frank Costello watched Bumpy's face, looking for a crack. Meyer Lansky's fingers drummed a silent, nervous rhythm on the tablecloth. Albert Anastasia, he just stared, his eyes promising murder. Bumpy took another drag. The ash on his cigar grew long. He finally spoke. What happens if I say no? Luciano's smile never faded, but his eyes, oh, his eyes went cold, dead cold, like 2 chips of black glass. Then we have a problem, because if you're not with us, you're against us, and nobody survives being against us. He didn't raise his voice. There was no anger, no bluster. It was a simple statement of fact, a law of the universe delivered over a crystal ashtray. Bumpy Johnson, he didn't flinch. He didn't look away. Instead, he carefully set his cigar down in that crystal ashtray. He reached for his briefcase. The click of the latches was like a gunshot in the quiet room. He didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a single black and white photograph.
He slid it, face down, across the smooth table. It stopped right in front of Luciano. Luciano looked at it. He picked it up. His face, that famous, impassive face, didn't change. Not a muscle twitched, but his fingertips pressed so hard against the edges of the photograph they turned white. The picture showed a warehouse in Red Hook, Brooklyn, one of Anastasia's most profitable, most secret gambling operations. And there, in the foreground, shaking hands with a well-known, notoriously corrupt police captain, was Anastasia himself, smiling. "That was taken 3 days ago," Bumpy said, his voice so quiet they all had to lean in to hear. "I've got 12 more just like it. Different warehouses, different cops, different members of your organization." The room didn't just go quiet, it went dead. The air was sucked out. Frank Costello's hand froze halfway to his jacket. Anastasia shot up from his chair, his face a mask of pure volcanic rage. "You son of a—" But Luciano didn't even look at him. He kept his eyes locked on Bumpy Johnson. His voice was a razor's edge. Are you threatening me?" "No," Bumpy said, calm as a deep, still lake. "I'm showing you respect, because I could have sent these to the district attorney yesterday. I could have mailed them to every newspaper in this city. I could have burned your whole operation to the ground before you even knew I had them. But I didn't." He leaned forward now, his own gaze intense, powerful. "You want what Schultz wanted, what every Italian crew that's ever looked at Harlem has wanted, control. But you can't have it, not because you're not smart enough, not because you're not strong enough, because Harlem is not yours to control." He pointed his cigar toward the window, toward the north, where the lights of Harlem glittered in the winter night. "You know why Schultz failed? He thought black people were stupid. He thought we'd just hand over our money and say thank you, sir. He thought muscle was enough. But Harlem doesn't work that way. You need trust. You need respect. You need to be one of us. And you, Mr. Luciano, you will never be one of us." Frank Costello opened his mouth to speak, to defend the honor of the family, but Luciano silenced him with nothing more than a flick of his eyes. The message was clear. Let him finish.
"But here's what I will do," Bumpy continued, his voice dropping, becoming firmer, more precise. "You asked for 40%. You can have 10% of the profits, not as protection money, as a service fee. You provide banking support, clean, legitimate fronts. We need to pay winners when the heavy numbers hit, and we can't do it from a mattress full of cash. You provide legal help, the best lawyers, when our runners get arrested. In return, you get 10% of the net, clean." He leaned back in the boss's chair, but his posture was anything but relaxed. It was the posture of a man issuing an ultimatum. "And one more thing. You never, and I mean never, send your people into Harlem to collect. Your soldiers, your tough guys, your guns, they don't set foot in my neighborhood. You want your money? You send a single, unarmed courier to my office. I'll have it counted, wrapped, and ready. But Harlem stays black. Harlem stays mine. That is the deal." The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the ice melting in the whiskey glasses. You could hear the collective, held breath of the most dangerous men in New York. It was Meyer Lansky who broke it, the financier, the pragmatist. He turned to Luciano, his voice a dry whisper. "Charlie, he's right. That's actually a very smart play. 10% for essentially no risk, no overhead, no exposure on the streets. It's clean money. It's brilliant." But Anastasia, the killer, was not convinced. His pride was bleeding. "And what's to stop him," Anastasia snarled, glaring at Bumpy, "from cutting us out the second we set up the banking? Huh? What's the guarantee?" Bumpy answered before Luciano could. His voice was flat, final.
The same thing that stops you from trying to take Harlem by force. A stalemate, a perfect, beautiful stalemate. You try to cheat me, those 12 photographs go public. Your political protection evaporates overnight. I try to cheat you, you come after me with everything you've got, and we both lose. Or we both get rich. Your choice. Lucky Luciano stared at Bumpy Johnson. He didn't look at the photograph. He didn't look at his furious underboss. He looked only at Bumpy, at the calm defiance in his eyes, at the sheer breathtaking audacity of the man who had walked into the lion's den and tamed the lions with a picture and a proposition. And then Luciano started to laugh. It wasn't a mocking laugh. It wasn't cruel. It was a genuine, deep, surprised laugh of pure admiration. He shook his head, a wide grin spreading across his face. You know what, Bumpy? Schultz was an idiot, a loud, stupid idiot. He should have talked to you first. Lucky Luciano stood up, the king rising. He extended his hand across the table. 10%. Banking and legal support. No soldiers in Harlem, and you deliver the money, monthly. Bumpy Johnson stood up. He met Luciano's gaze, and then he took the offered hand, one firm, solid grip that sealed the fate of New York's underworld for a generation. We have a deal. Frank Costello let out a long, slow exhale he didn't know he'd been holding. Meyer Lansky allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Even Anastasia, he sank back into his chair, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a grudging, simmering respect. Luciano held on to Bumpy's hand for an extra second, a meaningful second. Let me tell you something, Bumpy. I've done business with presidents, with cops, with union bosses, with killers. But you're the first man who ever came to my table, looked me in the eye, and told me no without pulling a gun. That takes guts, or stupidity. I haven't decided which yet. For the first time that night, Bumpy Johnson smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. When you figure it out, he said, releasing the handshake, you let me know. 3 weeks later, as scheduled, Lucky Luciano boarded the Laura Keene, a ship bound for Italy. He stood at the rail, watching the skyline of his empire fade into the mist. He never set foot on American soil again, never. But the deal he made in the Stork Club with the man in the three-piece suit, it held like iron for 22 years. The numbers racket in Harlem flourished, a well-oiled machine. Every month, like clockwork, Bumpy Johnson's courier delivered a package to a midtown office, the 10%, never late, never short. The Italians, through Meyer Lansky's genius, provided flawless banking through legitimate fronts, laundromats, restaurants, vending machine companies. When Bumpy was finally arrested on narcotics charges in 1951 and sent to the nightmare of Alcatraz, Frank Costello himself made sure Bumpy's wife, May, wanted for nothing. It was business, honorable business. And when Bumpy walked out of prison in 1963, a free man, the deal was still intact, the understanding still respected. That meeting in February of 1946 became legend, not in the newspapers, but in the whispered lore of the underworld, in the social clubs of Little Italy and the barber shops of Harlem. They didn't talk about it because of a shootout. They talked about it because there wasn't one. They talked about it because two men from two utterly different worlds, a Sicilian immigrant king and the proud, unconquered king of Harlem, sat down and with sheer will and intellect found a way to do business without destroying each other. They drew a line, and neither one ever crossed it. Luciano, from his exile in Naples, would later tell his associates, with a hint of awe still in his voice, Bumpy Johnson was the smartest gangster I ever met, and the most dangerous. Why? Because he didn't need me to respect him. He demanded it. Bumpy, for his part, never spoke publicly about that night, not a word. But those closest to him, they said he kept that original photograph of Anastasia shaking hands with the police captain. He didn't keep it in a safe. He kept it in a simple frame on the wall of his office, not as a threat to anyone else, as a reminder to himself, a reminder that in the world of power, true power isn't about who has the biggest gun, or the loudest voice, or the most soldiers. True power is about who is smart enough to see the whole board, who is brave enough to sit at the head of the table before being invited, and who is wise enough to know when not to pull the trigger. That night, in the glow of the Stork Club, Bumpy Johnson taught that lesson to the most powerful mobster in history, and history has never forgotten it.